Hi, my name is Jeanne Lyons. I'm the Special Needs Religious Education Coordinator for St. Peter Chanel Church in Roswell, Georgia. Our topic today is making Mass attendance possible and even joyful for families affected by disabilities. When I began working at this position at St. Peter Chanel, I thought about how very difficult it had been for my two sons, my husband and I, to attend Mass as a family when the boys were young. They're both adults now, but my oldest is on the autism spectrum, and my youngest struggled with sensory issues when he was young. Now, many of us remember being told to sit still and pay attention, but several disabilities make it practically impossible to do that. And for persons whose nervous systems work differently, especially for kids who are sensory seekers, certain types of movement are what can make it possible to pay attention. So I did a lot of thinking about how I could make it easier for families like mine to attend Mass, how I might set things up so that children who are sensory seekers could feel more comfortable attending Mass. If attending Mass means putting all your energy into trying to make your body be still in a way that makes it actually harder to focus on what's going on at Mass, then you grow up equating Mass with extreme frustration, and that's not a good thing. So at St. Peter Chanel, we have two small cry rooms in the back of the church. Our pastor, Monsignor Peter Rao, gave me permission to commandeer one of those rooms for at least one Mass each weekend to deck it out with sensory equipment in order to create a sensory-friendly go-to-Mass space for families affected by disabilities. Now, not every church has a cry room, so some churches might consider using the technology they've adopted during the pandemic for live streaming Masses to create a sensory-friendly space in another room near the church where you could set up similar equipment similar to what I'm about to show you, and where Mass can be viewed and communion could be brought to the families. So I'd love to show you what we have here in our sensory-friendly go-to-Mass space at St. Peter Chanel. So you can consider whether something similar might help families affected by disabilities in your own parish. So come on in. So the first thing I wanted to set up in our sensory-friendly go-to-Mass space is a picture schedule. And a lot of children are familiar with picture schedules because teachers will use them at school. And ours is set up to go across from left to right. But some families have set it up to go clockwise or counterclockwise, so it really doesn't matter. But we have volunteers who staff the room, and as each item that's pictured up here happens at the Mass, they'll go up and take it and maybe hold it up to the group and say, "We're starting the entrance song," and they'll show it to the group, but then also take it around and show it to the individual children. And, maybe even say, something quick like, "Can you find which one's supposed to be the priest? Can you touch the priest? Where's the altar?" That type of thing. And I've also had to explain to my volunteers that for some of the kids who attend in here with their families, it's important that they're with their families. that sometimes it's hard to get a child with a disability such as autism to look at the picture. So you see where that child is looking, and you move the picture to where they're looking. And it might look like they're paying attention. It might look like they're not paying attention at all. But as time goes on and the more their family comes, you'll be amazed at how they start to pick up on these things. And with some of the pictures, it might look funny, like this one for, we bless ourselves in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. But since we're in the back of the church, this is what the kids see when they're looking out. They see people's backs going like this. So that's why this one looks unusual. But the important thing with a picture schedule is that as each item happens, then it's put away. So this also becomes a way to measure how much time is left at Mass, because isn't that the eternal question? How much longer? How much longer? And so the kids don't need to ask that when you're using a picture schedule, because they can see how much longer. And it really is amazing how after being here a few weeks, kids will be able to say what's coming next. Some of them start to be able to read the words on the signs. You know, it's a lot of them start to learn the parts of the Mass better than the cradle Catholics who've been coming for years and are sitting out there in the pews. So this is our picture schedule. Now in this corner, we have a special kind of a beanbag chair, because for some of the kids with sensory differences, the feeling of deep pressure on their skin can be very calming and relaxing and soothing. So this is a beanbag chair that doesn't have those little pellets that get all over the place inside. Instead, it has foam cubes, which also make it more fluffable. And the kids, sometimes they'll jump into it, sometimes they'll just sit in it, and when they sit down you can just hear them go and that's always nice to have that happen at Mass. So the room has lots of things just to help kids to feel comfortable. Now this might seem really wacky, but we actually have a mini trampoline in our sensory-friendly go-to Mass space, and it gets a lot of use. Some of the kids, you know, they'll just come over here and they'll need to take little movement breaks and do some bouncing. A volunteer might come over and hold a child's hand while they're bouncing and be saying the prayers with them during the Mass while they're bouncing. And you might look at this and think, well, gosh, the kids are just going to go crazy. But for kids like my son, they might actually need some extra input to their vestibular system. And that's exactly what happened with my oldest, who's on the autism spectrum. And by being on here and jumping, what he was actually doing, and I learned this from his occupational therapist, is that he was sloshing the fluid that's in, I think it's in the semicircular canals of the inner ear. And that's where you get your balance sense, and it kind of tells you that your body's on balance and you're feeling good in your body and you know where you are in space. Except for that my son just needed a lot more input. And the ways you get that are by rocking or swaying or bouncing or spinning. And just to give you a neat story from a parish that we used to go to that has to do with the vestibular system. My oldest, again, who has autism, it was so neat what would happen during the Our Father during Mass, because at this parish that we belonged to years ago when we lived in a different house, for the Our Father, everyone would hold hands, even to the point of people coming out into the aisles to hold hands with the row across the aisle. And so we'd be in one of those rows and everyone's holding hands, but my son wouldn't just stand still. That he needed that sloshing, and so he would start swaying. And so I would say to my husband, let's see how long it takes for him to get the whole row swaying during the Our Father. And it really only took a few seconds, and so we'd all join hands, we'd start the Our Father, and in my brain I'm thinking, wait for it, and pretty soon I'm looking down and the whole row is getting that nice vestibular input, and I'm sure that my son was helping a few other children who were in that row as well. Now, sometimes it's good to just have some puzzles available for the children, because that's a nice quiet activity. And a lot of kids, particularly on the autism spectrum, can be very drawn to letters and numbers. That happened very early for my son. And we've had a few kids that have come over here and wanted to work on a puzzle during Mass. Now, they can still hear everything that's happening because the sound is piped in. But sometimes if they, need a little break, or actually even just having some things to do like this, it looks like they're not focusing on what's happening. But if you have something to keep your hands busy, sometimes for the kids I see that it kind of puts them in the zone, and you'll notice that they are listening while they're doing something like this. And you can even help with things like if a child comes over here to the puzzle, a volunteer can spell out the word holy, during the holy, holy, holy prayer, or spell out the word love and just remind them how much God loves them. And the whole idea is that you have things here that they love, and they connect that idea of, when I come into this building, there are things here that I love, there are things here that make me feel welcome. And, that's what Jesus is all about, and just developing those positive associations with coming to church, coming to Mass. Now, here's something I wouldn't put it in the room all the time. It would depend on the children. This is actually a magnetic marble run. And we had one family with kind of like mine, two kids with some disabilities, and one of them just really did not like coming to Mass. So I talked with Mom about things that he liked to do at home. And I also, in getting to know him in our religious education classes, I found out that he loves marble runs. And so for him, I would have this available. And the thing that was absolutely amazing is that I first thought, well, this will get him in the door, and he can be playing with this. We can build that positive association with Mass, and then maybe we can kind of fade it out, replace it with other things as he gets more comfortable. But he just kept working on this, and this setup that I've put together just to show you how this toy works is nothing compared to the contraptions that he would design. And he would be just working and working on them, and the Mass is going on. And, a person might look and think, well, this kid might as well just be at home playing. He's not noticing anything that's going on. But after a while, again, it was that idea of this particular activity would put him in the zone. And he started responding to the prayers while he was doing this. And, he's working away, he's flipping the magnetic dry erase board over and using it horizontally and creating all these contraptions. And all of a sudden, one weekend during the gospel, he was just working away, and they said, a reading from the gospel according to Mark. And he looks up at his mom, who's sitting here in the front pew in our cry room, and he says, "Mom, we've been hearing a lot from the Gospel of Mark lately." And then I could kind of jump in and explain to him how, the liturgical years were set up, and that, yes, he was exactly right. This whole liturgical year, we would be hearing mostly from the Gospel of Mark. And, I really wondered how many people out there in the pews without any kind of a disability had even noticed that. And so, this is a room where amazing things happen and lots of little miracles. And even the people who have volunteered here in the sensory-friendly cry room, you might think, oh, well, it's just a barrel of monkeys. They find that these little things that happen in watching the children connect to the Mass are what make it such an awesome way to go to Mass, as a helper here in the sensory-friendly cry room. So in this corner of the room, we have one of my son's spin boards. Now this chair, this is completely separate. So I just have this chair sitting here on top of a spin board, and it's kind of like a giant lazy Susan that a child could sit on. And for my son, again, to help with his vestibular system, he would sit on something like this. Let's see, move it away from the wall, and it can really get spinning. But you can hear the noise from it, and that wouldn't exactly be good for Mass. So we brought it in here, but I scoot it back so it does slow it down a bit. And if a child is sitting on this chair, that slows it down quite a bit too. But it gives them another way to stay in one place, but have some movement. So a child might sit in here, and this is actually a weighted blanket, which can be very soothing and relaxing, and it gives you, again, that deep pressure on your skin that we talked about when we were looking at the beanbag chair that gives you a hug when you sit in it. And so a child might sit in here and use their feet to get it to spin, or even just go from side to side. So it's not, spinning super fast and getting them wound up, but it's something that can help them relax and feel calm. Now this is an amazing addition to our sensory-friendly Go to Mass space that is actually an Eagle Scout project that was done for us by a high school student named Will Much. And Will just did a great job. He created this as a cart for me to be able to haul the stuff back and forth to the religious education office. And so, for instance, the spin board can slide up and roll up into there. And so it's a cart, but on either side, it's a sensory wall. And so kids can come over here and have different textures to feel. And it's just been a wonderful addition to our sensory-friendly Go to Mass space. And up on top, we have a tote full of different kinds of quiet fidgets, because just sometimes sitting in the pew and having something quiet to fidget with can help a child to focus. Different kinds of stress balls. Now, sometimes you want to be careful not to use stress balls that are actual balls, because a ball shape can make it very tempting for a child to start throwing it around the room. And you might want to avoid that. But just little fidgets that you can get in lots of different places. That can really help children with sitting still and having something, if they have something to do with their hands, and it can actually make it easier to sit still and also be able to pay attention. Now, something like this, while it looks kind of cool, might not be a good idea because it makes a noise. So you might want to stay away from that type of a fidget. Some kids might have sensitive hearing, so in that case they'd be a sensory avoider with loud sounds, or actually sounds that might not seem loud to most people, but might be a particular frequency that can actually hurt for some children whose nervous systems and therefore their sensory system works differently. So this is, I think these cost like $10, an inexpensive sound dampening set of headphones that there's no music in here. No chords, but it just has some foam that helps to quiet down the sounds where you can still hear what's going on, but it just takes the edge off some of the sounds. And speaking of sounds, back here is where we control the sound in the room. And if you notice that there are certain children that while they're in here with their families, they're plugging their ears or burying their heads in mom's lap, that might be a way to try to stop the sound. It might be while a certain lector is reading, maybe that particular voice is problematic. Or it might just be during certain hymns. If you notice that going on, you can come over here and turn the sound down when you notice that happening. So it might be helpful to have a volunteer who is in charge of watching for reactions to sound and turning the sound down when it's needed. Now, just because you have a sensory-friendly go-to-mass space in your church, that doesn't mean that that's where every family belongs who has a family member with a disability. And say you were able to set up a space like this, you would not go out and insist that everyone with a disability come back here into this room. Because you are going to have families. I know when I first started my job here, there were families who had been coming, and I call them the trailblazers. They might have had kids that did a lot of extra movement, maybe even some vocalizations during Mass, and I'm sure they got some, stares or even, those disapproving looks, and they just kept coming to Mass, and they learned to not pay attention to the people who gave them funny looks, and coming back and insisting that they belong in a cry room like this, a sensory-friendly go-to-Mass space, would actually be a step backwards for a family like that. They've already made it over the humps, and they're out there educating the rest of the parish, and so you wouldn't want to go up and say to them, you could make them aware that the space is available if they felt it would be helpful, and maybe some of them might go, oh, whew, that would be great, but others might feel like, no, we're doing this, and they might have noticed other parishioners who have begun to welcome their family and have gotten used to some of the differences, and that's what it's all about. This is not a room for segregation of people with disabilities, but it can be a way to help families to come back to Mass who may have given up, or even families that say they get a diagnosis, even if it's something like ADHD, and it's so hard for their child to sit still, and they just feel like, well, Mass is not an option for our family. And actually having a space like this for that family might let them know that, yes, Mass is an option. And a family who is able to do well in this type of a space, it doesn't mean that they have to stay here forever. What I encourage families to do is what I've heard of referred to as backward chaining. So say they've been coming to this room for a while, their child knows the picture schedule inside and out and can tell you what's coming next at Mass. Their child has found things in the room that have been helpful. Some of them even start to outgrow their sensory differences. And what they can do then is, as we're getting toward the end of Mass, go out into the regular pews for the last 5 minutes. And then, wow, that was a great job, let's go get donuts. And then the next time they come to Mass, maybe go out in the pews for the last 7 minutes. And just build on that from the end of Mass moving forward, because you wouldn't want to, say a child really enjoys coming in here, you wouldn't want to start out there and say, well, you're big enough that you can use the regular pews, and then if the child's starting to get really antsy and they're falling apart and they're making noise and you're starting to feel uncomfortable, and then you say, okay, well, we're going back to the sensory friendly room, and inside the child's going, yay, that's all I need to do to get back into the sensory room. You don't want that to happen. So instead you do the backward chaining from the end of Mass. So you gradually build up more and more time that you're out there in the pew for more and more of the Mass, and then rewarding that. One thing we found important in this room, with the volunteers who work here, is to let the parents know when they come to this room for the first time, chances are their child's gonna go wild. And that's okay. It's going to be, the first few times, it's going to be a novelty situation. And the children will be very actively exploring what's available in the room. And at first, the parents will come in and they might even start to think, oh no, this is a disaster. I don't want my child thinking they can behave this way at Mass. When actually, if you tell them, this is how it goes when families first start using the room. The children are doing a lot of exploring. They're probably going to be more noisy. And yes, that's going to happen. You just keep coming, and then all of these things around the room just start to become part of the furniture. So if they're coming on a regular basis, then the children start to use the room to help themselves with connecting to the Mass. And it takes a few times before that starts to happen, before the novelty starts to wear off, and the children, the whole idea at first is building that positive association that coming to this church building is good. It's a good place to be. I'm welcomed here. They have things here that I like. And then the novelty wears off and the children start using the things as they need them for their sensory systems. And then you can gradually start the backward chaining, from the end of Mass, going out there in the regular pews for the last few minutes, the last 10 minutes, the last 15 minutes, the last half hour, until pretty soon you're able to go to Mass out there. Or, for some families, maybe they'll be in here for quite a while. And that's okay too, as long as they are feeling welcomed and it's a good positive association for their child. So I'd like to conclude with a little story about one of my students who actually made his first communion in this room. And he was a very busy child on the autism spectrum, definitely a sensory seeker. And his mother is an occupational therapist, and she was telling me that she thought that this room was helpful for her son in another way, in that she suspected that being out in the church, there was something about the light streaming down through the stained glass windows that, to most of us looks so beautiful, but for him that was overwhelming, and that light doesn't stream in here that way. So it might be a while before he's able to go out and be in the regular church, especially Sunday mornings when that light's streaming in. And we arranged for him to receive his first communion here. And my student was so excited. He just could not sit still. And he was all over the room, and you could look at that and think, oh, misbehavior, or you could look at that and think, we should all be so excited to receive Jesus. And this little boy had brought an item from home that he just clutched in his hand and just would not let it go that day, and it was a flashlight. And so he received his first communion with the flashlight and Jesus, receiving in his hand. And as he did that, I said, oh, look, that reminds us that Jesus is the light of the world. And that's how you have to interpret things like that for our children. So this was the room where he received his first communion. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you've learned some things that you can use in your parish. And if you need some help, feel free to email me. I'll do my best to help you out. And I did want to add that sometimes people think that when you provide this type of a program that you're just going to be flooded with all kinds of people with all kinds of disabilities, and it's going to be overwhelming. But that's not what I found. I have found that people tend to kind of trickle in. So if that happens, don't get discouraged. Or even if you've had a few people coming, and one weekend you go and get the room all set up for a sensory-friendly go-to-mass space, and nobody comes. That happens once in a while. It takes so much effort sometimes for families affected by disabilities to get everything together and get out of the house and go to Mass. So don't be discouraged, and just do what you can to welcome families affected by disabilities. It's a great way to see the face of Jesus. And God bless you in your efforts.